It's that time again, folks. Time to break out the ice cubes because we're going to need to cool down after these hot takes. I should know, I am currently recording in a bedroom that feels like it's sitting exactly 20 feet from the sun. So let's burn off some of this and get into the spice. Venom Blade 95 writes, Help Wanted and the rogue indie developer hint was the moment FNAF finally jumped the shark. Still love the series and the game, but something changed after that awful twist. I've gotta be frank, I agree. The moment that plot point was written in, it made the series a lot more confusing, because now all past information is sort of thrown into a void on credibility. What's real? What's made up? Maybe everything we know will suddenly be revealed to be fake, and while that would make for a twist, it would also mean that there's no story anymore, at least none that we can trust or follow. It was unnecessary. Untitled Clock Hater writes, I do not care for Sundrop. He bothers me. What? How can you say that, Untitled Clock Hater? He's so good. He's like the perfect character. Puppet shows, glitter glue. I mean, you can never see googly eyes. Okay, I'm kidding. Obviously, you can like or dislike whoever you want. No Godfather treatment here. Kendall Charles Well writes, My hot take. Michael Afton should have gotten arrested. I mean it. It makes no sense that the entire incident was allowed to happen, other than for shock and plot purposes. He was at a public venue with employees and other children and their families around. Someone should have said something, anything, to the police, and Michael should have been arrested for maiming and involuntarily murdering his younger brother. Honestly, you've got a good point. I mean, we're not sure how old he was at the time, but kids have gotten arrested. Now, would he have gotten charged? Probably not. I'm not sure how the Utah court system works, but if this was like 4 16-year-old boys shoving a small child's head into a robot's mouth and causing major bodily injury, oh yeah, get the paddy wagon. Jazz Bones writes, I'm tired of FNAF. Like, I love it, don't get me wrong, but Lord, the unnecessary confusing lore, the unhinged fanbase consisting primarily of 10-year-olds, teenage fangirls, and 30-year-old neckbeards in their mom's basements, they're even more unhinged theories. It's all been fueled by the inconsistent storyline, and I just want Scott to just give us some answers. It's exhausting being in this fandom sometimes. I understand where you're coming from. Being in a fandom alone can be tiring, but keeping up with FNAF can be especially rigorous. The tides turn often. My recommendation is, if you get to feeling like this, then maybe you just should step away from the lore stuff for a while and focus more on what really draws you to FNAF. Don't let yourself get overwhelmed, okay? I mean, easier said than done, but I know that, but it's a goal. Error No Name writes, I do not get the appeal of Montgomery Gator in the slightest. The amount of people putting him as their favorite is, in my opinion, a bit insane, given that he's literally just the Brute character. Sure, there's potential there, but it's untapped potential at best. Glamrock Freddy is just an all-around sweetheart. Roxanne is grappling with self-worth issues and gets characterization in Ruin. Chica is similarly grappling with an issue of her own, that being an eating disorder which is built upon further in Help Wanted 2. The daycare attendant always had that whole Jekyll and Hyde appeal, and later got the further characterization from Help Wanted 2, just as Chica did. Vanny is the dictionary definition of wasted potential, and it's a miracle she hasn't been cut from the dictionary at this rate, but you can't deny she has a lot of build-up. And then there's Monty. I may have missed a scene or two, I'm not sure, but the very closest thing we got into characterization of Monty is his all-but-confirmed murder of Bonnie. Various scenes of him being angry, and his voice lines regularly portraying him as being dumb. So from this perspective, he really does just seem like that big, dumb, angry one. And again, maybe I missed a scene or two, but from what I can gather, nothing else has been done with that. If his fatal flaw is anger, then there's no indication of him exactly suffering from it like the others have. If Security Breach were to be the game from the trailers, was going to be shattered due to the care he showed for Gregory, and how trusting he was. Roxy was shattered due to her own hubris and jealousy, leaping onto the racetrack because she can't stand to see somebody else doing well on the track. Chica gets shattered because she gets drawn to the food and trash in the compactor, falling victim to her own flaw as the others did. Monty is shattered because he decided to go up on the catwalk since Gregory was up there, and then walk towards Gregory in an unfortunate spot. It isn't like he ran in a blind rage and the catwalk broke away to send him falling, or that he accidentally destroyed some of the supports in his anger. He just walks up to Gregory and gets hit with a really big bucket. Again, there is potential there, but I really doubt there will be any major and or organic opportunity for this to be built upon, especially considering the implications that Monty may have literally died during Ruin, given that part with him in the Bonnie light. You've got a point, and I think maybe Monty Gator's popularity might actually be tied with that lack of use. So what I've seen is two avenues of thought. One, Monty Gator is overlooked by everyone, and because of that, it actually makes fans feel bad for him and sympathize with him. Two, Monty is misunderstood, mistreated, and believed to have been framed, which also does the same thing. It gives Monty the illusion as the underdog. Only one problem, that's not what we see in-game. It is quite literally an illusion because Monty doesn't get enough screen time to verify any of this. Same with the bundles upon bundles upon bundles of hints that he actually did in fact shatter Glamrock Bonnie. So I'm thinking that the appeal is that fabricated persona of the mistreated Monty and likely his design, which I'll admit, his design and voice are really cool, but there's just not enough to really, Only thing that could have 180'd him would have been a Help Wanted 2 minigame, but he was cut from Bonnie Bowl. I repeat, he was cut from Bonnie Bowl. And I ended up unlocking his model replaying El Ship's food prep stage, so unless we find out that he really likes tacos, he kinda missed out. I also decided that I wanted to add a point right here. Brutish characters with a bit of a temper can still be very entertaining and still have a soft side. One of the characters I think of is 8 from 9, who is basically just one's workhorse, one's bodyguard who does whatever he tells him to. He is somewhat unfairly labeled as the dumb one, because he doesn't know what subjugate means, and because he's more of a fighter than he is a tactician. But, I mean, he's a really good fighter, so I'll give him that. But there's a scene in 9, and it only lasts maybe about 4 or 5 seconds. And one's looking up at the burning cathedral. Spoilers for 9. One's looking up at his burning home, and he's sad. And he's this old, crotchety man who is basically picking fights with everybody. And 8, his bodyguard, who he kind of just bosses around anyway, comes up, gives him a pat on the back, and then leads him away like he's leading away his old dad. That is a really nice amount of characterization that Monty didn't get, so there's that. Really just an excuse to talk about 9. Guardian of the Fourth Wall writes, I accidentally deleted this, so I'm reposting it. Whoops. I've also added and rewritten a few parts. Hot takes time? Oh boy, I've been eagerly awaiting this day for a while because I do have a bone to pick with a certain mimic. This is a bit of a pseudo-rant hot take rolled into one, and I might not sound too coherent, but too long didn't read. I've come to hate the overrated, overtyped, plot-convenient pile of scrap metal. Overhyped, not overtyped. I've come to hate this overrated, overhyped, plot-convenient pile of scrap metal. Let's get this out of the way first. When I first heard of the Mimic in the book series, I thought it was a really cool idea with potential for some great stories. A lot can be done with a character like this, and the design they gave it in Ruin is really cool. Currently, I haven't read all the books, but the backstory was intriguing, and I wanted to see where they take their story. And that's where my praise ends, because here comes the salt. Let's start with the fact that I was almost immediately spoiled that he was in Ruin. I won't write the whole story here since I've done that on a prior video, but the short version is despite my best efforts to go out of my way to avoid spoilers so I can go in blind, whenever I manage to get around to it, the first day wasn't even over before both Twitter and YouTube spoiled it on me, despite being signed out of the latter and muting keywords on the former. I since have even had the books spoiled for me as well, and currently I'm still not up to date with those outside of the few tidbits I've heard about the epilogues. Hold on just a moment. Okay, before I continue, allow me to tell you the story of how I had the Mimic spoiled. Since I only discussed it once, then it was in my Ruin playthrough Rage Quit, because this is a doozy. So I had Burntrap and the Blob spoiled by a thumbnail while I was playing through Security Breach, but I didn't realize it was them and instead thought that it was a Source Filmmaker thing, because I was getting a lot of those recommended, a lot. And I didn't realize until I saw the ending that, oh wait, yeah, that was spoiled. But then, the night before Ruin came out, I see another thumbnail and title and it spoils the ending for me. Or so I think, because it was actually fake. It was like a fake ending made months ago or something that only just picked up traction. So it shouldn't have spoiled anything, right? The title was something along the lines of, "The Mimic is Springtrap, Security Breach Real Final Boss." And so I went through the game knowing Mimic was going to show up, even before it became very obvious that Gregory was the Mimic 2.5 minutes in. Anyway, continue. But that's not the biggest reason why I've come to dislike the character. Oh no, I absolutely detest what's been done to both the lore and theory discussion because of their inclusion. Don't get me wrong, the lore was already super busted by the time this guy came around, but Mimic showing up only somehow managed to make things even worse. Suddenly the Mimic and the books were now the answer for everything. Now you have to read the books in order to understand the game lore, not to mention the now plentiful retcons and retroactive story retellings in the games. If you so much as disagreed or had a differing opinion, then you were wrong. There was so much discourse because of just this one character that it makes my head spin. And don't even get me started on the whole book debacle, because that in itself is a headache. If you have to rely on books to fill in the story of your video game, then something has gone terribly wrong with the storytelling. The cherry on top of all this is the rabid fanbase I've seen for the Mimic. Yes, I know, not all Mimic fans are like this, but the amount of times I've seen Mimic fans go way too far to defend their Precious is actually ridiculous. That they actually call him their Precious? I'm hoping that's an exaggeration. Stretching to fit narratives or make points is one thing, but I've seen people viciously dogpile others for simply making a joke at Mimic's expense, and God help you if you ever even think about siding with Afton in an Afton versus Mimic debate. Again, I must state that I am very much aware that not all Mimic fans are like that, but it does happen way more frequently than it should. All of this combined I feel should make anyone feel sort of fatigued for the Mimic. I want to like this guy, I really do. They're an interesting character with a neat concept, cool design, and an intriguing story, but as it stands, there's a lot of issues surrounding this character that makes it hard for me to enjoy them. I honestly could go on and on about how much I dislike this character and how many issues they have surrounding them, but considering how long this comment actually is, it would be wise if I didn't. Besides, I feel like I've gone off enough on this guy. For now, at least. So I disagree. I do not want to like the Mimic. I didn't like Eleanor, I didn't like the illusion discs, I ain't liking this guy. Also, I'll admit, I dislike how all of the theorizing has sort of boiled down to X is the Mimic, or the Mimic did X. This thing was sitting in a burned out basement, and yet apparently not only is it a bunch of different people, but it has been willingly controlling everything despite the fact that it can't even make a functional costume. And if I have to hear about the magic Pizzaplex tree one more time, if I see it is another story, but so far I ain't seeing sand. But yeah, the amount of aggressive discourse, this was what Jazzbones was talking about. The fighting in the community is just overwhelming, especially for me because I can't stop actuallying in my own comment section. Actually, Monty smushed Glamrock Bonnie. I plan on making a Mimic video soon, and I'll do a better job of putting my feelings into there, and I won't be nearly as salty about it. But I think Mimic's end-all, be-all approach of being Afton but being his own character, but not really being his own character, being piecemeal of other characters, I think it kind of shot him in the foot even before he took his first step. Also, Ennard is better. Bradley Moffat writes, hot take, the whole thing about Playdoh Ennard and stuff is dumb. The models aren't supposed to be viewed without lighting, and look fine in the game, in my opinion. Unless, of course, it's in the in-game gallery. Izzy Bumblebee writes, maybe not a hot take, but I really wish the human characters' models were less cartoony. Agree. I understand why they're somewhat cartoony, but I feel like they could be a little less so. The only exception is Cassie, who looks a lot better with the larger expressive eyes than with the more realistic eyes, but sort of off ones in the Ruin model. Even Gregory looks a lot cuter with his statue beta big ol' eyes, but his are less of an issue than Cassie's were. Material Girl Newtmare writes, John X Charlie is terrible. Oh yeah, okay, so I might not have another real chance to talk about this again until maybe the Charlie's Friends video whenever that comes out, but the romance between Charlie and John is really rough. And that is strictly from the fact that John has no character outside of being a love interest. He's basically a copy and paste of Charlie, but take out all of her issues, her weirdness, her quirkiness, the trauma, and you've got John. Usually just there to pat Charlie on the back and let her talk at him. John was clearly just made to be love interest, and it reflects on their relationship where they have zero chemistry. They were apparently childhood sweethearts, and upon meeting back up, they're already buddy-buddy, crushy-crushy without any meat and potatoes or teeth to chew with. During this period, John is just standard boyfriend archetype. They go out on one date, and he ends up telling Charlie he loves her at the end of that book. Then she returns it at the end of the next book, and during this whole time, they keep doing the whole "we just met after years" thing. There is zero chemistry. The hilarious part is that John has such little character that when he takes over for Charlie as the lead in Half of the Fourth Closet, he starts acting more like her, only to get demoted back to plain white sauce once she's back in the fold. And that's leaving out how weird he acts in that book. I say this with little hyperbole. Charlie would have better chemistry with any of her other friends, including Lamar, who was barely in the trilogy before he's sent off on a bus. At least Lamar has that straight man of the group energy. You could work with that. There are times where I feel like Carlton was the obvious love interest here, being that he is absolutely the secondary protagonist, being the one who is trapped by Will and learns about the Springlocks, who has a fleshed out family ties and has a major role in the final book, including being the guy who frees the ghost kids and defeats Afton for good. Like, I'm not sure whose idea it was to give this guy so much stuff going on and then give nothing to Charlie's love interest, but it doesn't work. TLDR, the worst thing you can do in a romance subplot is make it boring. JC Welsh writes, "Not sure if this is a hot take or not, but FNAF is completely dead. Has been since Security Breach, and I'm genuinely surprised the fanbase is still as big as it is, because truly, what is even the plot or the point anymore?" You know, people throw around the term dead a lot these days. I saw a comment just the other day. Well, I saw a comment practically a month ago telling me, "Bindi, isn't that series dead?" While a movie is in production, a mainline game and numerous spin-off games are in production, and the series is having a resurgence. Something isn't dead when it's still making games, books, movies, merch, and it's still selling. Creatively bankrupt? Maybe, though I wouldn't say FNAF's at that point. Into the Pit is a spin-off coming out, we have 2 movies on the horizon, and Choose Your Own Adventure books, and likely enough, probably a new mainline game sometime in the next few years, plus whatever we're going to have revealed/released in August. As a wise man once said, "While you're still sleeping, the saints are still weeping because things you call dead haven't yet had a chance to be born." I'm the Scat Man. User QK3FL9CM7B writes, "Still I stand by my hot take, FNAF would still be very unique if there was no games made after the first one." Well, maybe, but I also don't think it'd be a franchise. Heavens knows I wouldn't have gotten that invested, since discovering the puppet in a trailer was what initially got me hooked on the series. Probably wouldn't be a movie or anything, likely wouldn't be talking about it now, really. Draconic Wealth writes, "Hot takes. The Tales from the Pizzaplex stories were originally longer and have been chopped up to be shorter before publication, which is why many of them end so suddenly with no real conclusion, and why they often have strange and incongruous details. Small towns having mega pizzaplexes, characters who don't care about personal appearances suddenly being willing to be painfully carved up to be beautiful, and so on. This may also be true for other FNAF stories, but I have more experience with the Tales from the Pizzaplex ones, which I have been reading for comedic purposes. You might be onto something because the pacing of these short stories are very odd. Despite the fact that they are short stories, stories usually follow the same formula. Exposition, explaining who our characters are and what's happening. Then rising action, the actual story starts and moves. Climax, the big exciting part. Falling action, the stuff that comes after the climax. And the resolution, which is the end. The Tales from the Pizzaplex stories especially have an issue where they feel more like long exposition, brief rising action, sudden climax, and stop. In fact, usually the stories seem to immediately stop after the climax. Not all of them, but many. A lot of them also spend a lot of time just meandering around with unnecessary details. My mom once read this book where the author would often describe every meal in great detail. Like crazy detailed. And it wasn't a book about cooking at all, but like a romance novel. We actually joke about this book regularly, but that kind of feels like the same thing that's happening here. Like part 2 of the Bobby Dots, where compelling scenes will stop so that something unimportant can be described in excessive detail. Other stories did this, but Bobby Dots had 2 parts, and somehow they still felt like 2 completely different stories sharing a climax. Another possibility, and this is probably a really big possibility, is that these stories are just extremely rushed, and that someone just is basically starting the story when they hit a sudden deadline and have to get it out. Because these books publish very fast, and I'm like 98% sure that they're not all written by the same person. I'm pretty sure they have ghostwriters, because I know that a lot of Scholastic's, these short stories Scholastic does, have ghostwriters. So I just think it's a time crunch, and that's not an excuse, that's an explanation. Red Starfire writes, my hot take, FNAF has gotten way too kid-friendly for what is a horror franchise. Case in point being the movie, where the only thing that actually got a fear reaction out of me was the random balloon box jump scare, or how the atmosphere in the games has gotten a lot more lighthearted since Security Breach. You know, I think FNAF could benefit from going for a strict T rating. Like, I think Security Breach was rated T, so I don't know why they censored the word blood. Oddworld Soulstorm was a T-rated game, and it had blood, and mentions of slavery, poisoning, death. It gets pretty dark. Sligs are blowing up all over the place. There were visible bodies in 9. That is a T-rated movie. Yet FNAF decides that Vanny can't use a knife anymore. So yeah, the censorship behind FNAF is seriously confused. And I don't mind lighthearted stuff, some goofy stuff, some levity. I think that's dandy. My issue is stuff like the censoring blood. You're censoring blood while depicting a story of a middle-aged man in a rabbit suit slaughtering children like chickens. Something's rotten in Denmark. Because believe you me, you are not isolating your kid audience. Little tiny kids shouldn't be hearing stories about murder, probably, but the older kids who are old enough to be introduced to that are likely old enough to get a pass on the T rating. The Gooberisms writes, my hot take for today includes Scraptrap. He literally looks like he's changed his entire skeletal structure in Pizzeria Simulator. Like, his head is shaped like a peanut, or like Jimmy Neutron. Like, geez, what's the deal with him and peanuts? I had to include this hot take solely so I could show you this thing I found on the wiki the other day. I have no idea who made it, but thank you whoever did. Monster Energy writes, I want to put Golden Freddy in a meat grinder. How does a character that started being the most mysterious and interesting thing in the game end up being nothing? Like, the fandom from DeviantArt gives so many ideas of how Goldie was and what soul possessed him. I remember that Kamyet Mayebis AU, this man was a powerful being but also emotionally weak. He was insinuated to be possessed by both a kid and effing William Afton. His dynamic was so interesting because he took the role of Phantom Puppet as his alter ego. The fandom really wanted more of him, but we got more of Afton. That, at least for me, was kind of boring after FNAF 3. So here's the thing about Golden Freddy. I think that what kind of happened with Golden Freddy was a situation that, and I hate saying this, was kind of caused by the fans. I think Golden Freddy started out as an Easter egg that a lot of people put an excessive amount of attention onto, and because of that, he was brought back and given more hints and teases to being a bigger character, but then the game's kind of never really committed to having any significant moments with Golden Freddy. And I think kind of people maybe might have gotten their hopes up a little bit. But also, again, I can't fault them when they're getting carrot and sticked by this golden bear for like 5 different games. So, I don't know. I do agree. I would also love to put Golden Freddy in a meat grinder. Rafa Nazar writes, I feel like at this point the puppet marionette doesn't really matter anymore. I mean, it used to be the most important character in FNAF, but now it just feels like it's a side character and nothing more. Don't say that. We still have a chance to pull this back around. We can create a new puppet. We can have a second coming of this character, or we could just have like a new puppet, kind of like a Glamrock Freddy situation, or it's never coming back. Prothrunit writes, I hate Help Wanted Springtrap. Why did they make him look like that? He looks so much worse than his FNAF 3 counterpart, and AR did better replicating Springtrap than Help Wanted. I might even say that Scraptrap is better than Help Wanted Springtrap. He's looking pretty rough. As of right now, I have played Help Wanted 2, and I've seen Help Wanted 2, and I can say for sure that the modeling issues in Help Wanted 1 was probably just a matter of a small team and dealing with VR software, which is Still kind of budding, still kind of unfounded in a way. Kind of. And I'm gonna say that's why that model looks so rough. Because by the time, and Playdoh, oh my lord, let's talk about Playdoh Ennard again, he's looking bad. But then you look at Help Wanted 2 and everyone looks better, so this was just, oof, they just went through an ugly stage. Mattman writes, "This is my last attempt to get into a hot takes video. People have been debating on whether or not the FNAF games are canon or just games in universe. Why can't they be both? Because of that god-awful rogue indie developer moment we were talking about at the beginning of this video. That choice will haunt us forever, because we will never be able to know which narrator is more reliable." Abraham Stalker writes, "I really truly hate Scrap Baby. I can see her design as nothing but a downgrade. She's busy, but not in a way that adds anything. Her claw looks goofy to me, even knowing what it's done. She just looks like she's part dirty crab. The effing roller skates too. Oh my god, like why? Like, logically, why? I know this game series doesn't operate on that. It's rule of cool and rule of new character design, so more action figures, but come on. What'd she do? Lose her feet to Mon Freddy and decide this was the best option? Does she have robot feet wearing the skates, or is it just like wires in there?" Briefly interrupting, I think from the way it looks that it might just be that her wires are tethered to the roller skates. I love Classic Baby, and I genuinely find her unsettling. I've had nightmares about Classic Baby. Her voice, her sleek design, the way she looks like she shouldn't be that tall. It's also off-putting. But all that spook goes away when Scrap Baby rolls right past me with her crab arm crying about her daddy's approval. Edit, I forgot to mention, I'm dyslexic and struggle with spelling and grammar. Apologies, I tried to make it readable. No, it was great. It's absolutely fine. But, so, I mean, you make a very good point. I like Scrap Baby's design, but I can see the goofiness with the oversized claw and the roller skates. And I especially can see where someone might just not like the design, especially as a major change from Circus Baby. She is so different from Circus Baby that, yeah, it's a look. I agree, I understand it, I can see it. I still personally like Scrap Baby, but I can see, after that colorful description, I see exactly where you're coming from. Though the voice lines and personality, oh yeah, point goes to the original Circus Baby, hands down. Kirkebe writes, "I really hate Happy Frog. Her design was the worst in the entire series, and don't get me started on her voice in Ultimate Custom Night. I like Balloon Boy way more than Happy Frog, and I still want to throw BB into a trash compactor. Throw him into the meat grinder with Golden Freddy. Oh yeah, Happy Frog strikes me as the type who could definitely get annoying. I don't really have a strong opinion, but that's only because she barely exists. I could see her shtick getting old fast if she had any more screen time than she does." Scoodle Noodle writes, "I don't know if you're still doing this, but hot take, every single skin adaptation design of Chica is terrible. There are so many possibilities with her being a chicken to make her insanely creepy. Not to mention the amount of details you could go into. Like, look at Helen Hinny from Chuck E. Cheese. She's got feathers and actual chicken features. Chica doesn't have that. She's just the girl. I don't want a feminized chicken. I just want a chicken. I mean, Helen Henny was kind of feminized, but I get what you mean. Like, more on tour Chica and less toy Funtime and Glamrock Chica. And I get it. I think my favorite Chicas are the original and Glamrock, which seems like both sides of the spectrum. Withered Chica's pretty creepy, but I think she's the creepiest you can get. The only place you could go from here with her is like hyper-realistic chicken, and I feel like that would come off as too goofy. Molly McCaw from Indigo Park's design does the mascot real bird thing pretty darn well, but realistic chicken, I don't know. Off topic kind of, but I do agree on this aspect for Vanny. I think Vanny would have been a lot scarier if she wasn't in this skin-tight furry suit and was like in one of those vintage, fuzzy, funky-looking old Easter Bunny costumes, one where the fur is getting stuck over the eyes and everything's a little disproportioned, except for the hands, which always look a little too human. So, I kind of actually agree with you, I just agree with a different character. Burrito Cat writes, "I don't like putting Monty in a sympathetic view. I think there should be at least one Glamrock that is actually an awful person. I don't think the Monty killed Bonnie thing is a red herring. The theory community is just conditioned by normal FNAF lore to never take anything at face value. I think it's really funny to characterize Monty as an angry man-child who eventually snaps once all his leverage is destroyed and becomes a feral animal. I wouldn't have minded Monty having his own sympathetic edge, like having all of the Glamrocks have their issues and have been mistreated, and I would have been fine with that because they can still be antagonistic and not evil. But you are 100% right in the fact that there is so much evidence that Monty killed Bonnie and absolutely none that anyone else did, except it must have been Vanny, she framed Monty. And the ironic part is, why frame Monty? Nobody cared or apparently even found Bonnie. It was a pointless frame job. Even if it was a frame job, why? And then, of course, the Mimics whipped out. It was the Mimic. Again, why would the Mimic, a creature who perpetually mimics, run upstairs one night and just kill Bonnie, frame Monty, and leave? See, what grinds my gears about this is that if this theory becomes popular enough, there will be a retcon or a reveal or something like that actually, no, it looked like Monty, but it was the Mimic the whole time. Likely to make Mimic look better. Oy vey. Alright, with that out of the way, on to my hot take. Okay, this is probably my hottest take ever. Like, in all of these hot take videos, I feel like my hot takes have been mostly safe. The puppet was the crying child, the puppet was in the box, the puppet should have been Nexus. Pretty much just a lot of puppet takes, and one Monty did it swipe. But this will be my hottest take, hands down. Forgive my language, but I don't give a flying rat's ass about the Fall Fest of 1970. Fall Fest is a big buzzword of the day, with everyone under the mutual belief that the next game will surround it, and maybe it will, but I cannot be bothered. Now, I love clowns and circus animatronics and carnival attractions and carousels and all that good stuff. That stuff is great. And I was intrigued when Codename Carnival was found in ruin. Really neat. But Fall Fest 1970... Here's the thing. I understand why people are so interested in the prospect of going back in time and learning about the beginning of Freddy's, but I also can't understand why people are so interested in possibly retreading the same history at Freddy's. It goes one of two ways, really. Either Mimic is shoehorned into a role where he doesn't belong, or we get to hear the story of William Afton and the missing children incident again. The incident that, even when everybody present for it is largely gone, we still have to keep obsessing over. I would foam at the mouth for more circus-themed FNAF games and animatronics, but I don't want any more William history. I don't want to hear Mimic's Gary Stu backstory about how he was really there the whole time, and I don't want to keep pacing the same ground. You got it? I feel like if we go back to the beginning, we're either rewriting it to fit the narrative now, or just reminding ourselves of what happened already again. And let me be even more frank, the story currently, I'm kind of just waiting for it to be over so we can move on to the next thing. Like, I'm on the edge of my seat waiting for the eventual, and I've been doing that since Help Wanted 1. I'm not saying this whole era of games has a bad story. I'm saying that I've checked out, and I would like to just keep going and not have to backpedal all the way to the old diner. Especially now that Help Wanted 2 implied that the puppet was possessed after the rest of the animatronics. How exactly does the math work on that one? If I go any further, I'll be ranting, so let's end it here. And those were the batch of hot takes. Hope nobody got too burned. Thank you for watching.